an original story narrated exclusively for Love Written in Silence. Lady Catherine's gloved fingers tightened around her opera program. As whispers rippled through the crowded theater, all eyes drawn to the conspicuously empty seat beside her, when the Duke of Harrington appeared in the doorway of her box. His tall figure silhouetted against the gaslit corridor, she felt her heart quicken, despite her determination to remain unmoved. Their eyes met for just one dangerous moment before she deliberately turned away, her profile sharp against the crimson velvet curtains. The Duke settled beside her with practiced grace, close enough that she could detect the faint scent of sandalwood and leather, yet the careful inch of space between them felt more significant than any touch. "This vacancy was arranged," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the orchestra's tuning. "And I believe we are both meant to fall." Lady Catherine Blackwood had arrived at the Royal Opera House precisely 15 minutes before curtain, as was her custom. Her private box, second tier, stage left, afforded both excellent acoustics and strategic visibility. Tonight's performance of Rossini's Semiramide had drawn London's finest, and Catherine had secured her tickets weeks in advance. Lady Montgomery sends her deepest regrets, the usher had informed her upon arrival, extending a hastily penned note. She has been detained by an unexpected family matter. Catherine had merely nodded, keeping her face impassive despite the inconvenience. Attending the opera alone was not unheard of for a widow of her standing, but it invited unnecessary scrutiny. Lady Montgomery's absence left the second seat in her box conspicuously empty, a detail that would not go unnoticed. As the minutes ticked by, Catherine felt the weight of curious glances. Her emerald silk gown, selected to complement rather than outshine her companion's blue ensemble, now seemed an unnecessary concession. She adjusted her pearl choker and fixed her gaze on the still-lowered curtain. "Quite the turnout tonight," remarked Lord Pembroke from the adjacent box, leaning slightly toward the divider. "I'm surprised to see you without company, Lady Blackwood. Such a shame to waste prime seating when so many stand in the gallery." "Indeed," Catherine replied coolly, "though I find solitude preferable to unsuitable company." Lord Pembroke's smile tightened, discerning as always. Catherine returned her attention to her program, though her mind was elsewhere. Lady Montgomery had never missed an engagement without proper notice. Their friendship, while not intimate, was built on mutual respect and reliability. The orchestra began their final tuning. The lights dimmed incrementally, signaling the imminent start of the performance. Catherine settled back, resigned to an evening of solitary observation. Then the door to her box opened quietly. The Duke of Harrington stood in the doorway, his imposing figure momentarily halting the murmurs around them. His evening attire was impeccable, black tailcoat accentuating broad shoulders, the Order of the Garter discreetly visible at his breast. In the gaslight, his features appeared more severe than Catherine remembered from their last encounter at Lady Westmoreland's garden party 3 months prior. Their eyes met briefly. His revealed nothing. "Lady Blackwood." He inclined his head slightly. "I've been informed this seat might be available, with your permission." The orchestra's first notes began to swell around them. The audience settled into expectant silence. Catherine was acutely aware that their exchange was being observed by at least a dozen interested parties. "How fortuitous that you should appear precisely as the curtain rises, Your Grace," she replied, her voice low and controlled, "almost as if you anticipated the vacancy." "Almost," he agreed, taking the seat without waiting for explicit permission. "Though I assure you, had I truly anticipated it, I might have chosen different company for the evening." The barb was delivered with such polite detachment that anyone observing would have seen only cordial exchange. Catherine kept her gaze forward, her profile illuminated by the stage lights. "I would not have expected our business rivalries to follow us into the cultural sphere," she murmured as the overture toward its first crescendo. "This isn't about business." His voice was barely audible, meant for her alone. "This vacancy was arranged, Lady Blackwood, as was your companion's absence, and I believe we are both meant to fall." Catherine's fan stilled momentarily before resuming its gentle rhythm. "You speak in riddles, Your Grace. Look to box 5, he instructed, still not turning toward her. "Lord Harcourt with the Countess of Balmoral and Sir William Forsyth. They've been watching since you arrived." Notice how they pretend not to. Catherine allowed her gaze to drift casually across the theater. The trio he mentioned were indeed positioned with clear sightlines to her box, their attention too studiously fixed on the stage. "What game is this?" she asked, her voice hardening. "One where reputation is the wager," Harrington replied. "And neither of us has been invited to set the rules." As the first act unfolded on stage, Catherine discreetly assessed her unexpected companion, the Duke of Harrington, Alexander to his intimates. Though she had never presumed such familiarity, had been her most formidable adversary in London's financial circles for nearly 3 years. Their rivalry began when Catherine, newly widowed and determined to expand her late husband's shipping interests, outbid Harrington for exclusive rights to the Portuguese wine trade. His subsequent acquisition of 3 warehouses along the Thames that she had been negotiating for months was clearly retaliatory. Since then, they had circled each other with cautious respect, each acknowledging the other's acumen while never conceding ground. "Your investment in the Northern Railway was quite bold," Harrington remarked during a particularly thunderous aria that covered their conversation. "I wouldn't have expected such risk from you." "And I wouldn't have expected the Duke of Harrington to concern himself with my financial decisions," Catherine replied. "Unless, of course, you're still smarting from the Manchester contract." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That was admirably executed. Though I wonder if your board of directors fully appreciated the leverage you employed. My methods are my concern." She adjusted her gloves. "Just as your recent parliamentary maneuvers regarding import tariffs are yours. You've been paying attention. When dealing with adversaries who don't fight in the open." His expression remained impassive, but Catherine caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Is that what you believe me to be? Someone who doesn't fight in the open?" "What I believe is irrelevant to our current situation," she countered. "You claim we're being targeted. Explain." Harrington's gaze swept the theater before returning to the stage. "We've both made enemies among London's old guard. You by daring to succeed in a man's domain without appropriate deference. Me by supporting reforms that threaten certain entrenched interests. And you believe tonight is, what, a trap?" "I believe," he said carefully, "that someone is orchestrating a narrative where your reputation and my influence destroy each other quite efficiently." The first act concluded with thunderous applause, as the house lights brightened for intermission. Catherine became acutely aware of the precarious position they occupied. Seated together in her private box, they presented a tableau that invited speculation. The independent Lady Blackwood and the notorious Duke of Harrington, known rivals suddenly in intimate proximity. "We have 3 options," Harrington said, turning slightly toward her as the audience began to stir. "We can part ways immediately, confirming whatever rumors have already begun. We can publicly acknowledge our mutual dislike, creating a scene that will be recounted in every drawing room tomorrow. Or we can present a united front," Catherine finished, her mind racing ahead, "suggesting a relationship that doesn't exist. A temporary alliance," he clarified. "Nothing more." Catherine considered the theater's occupants with new awareness. The Countess of Balmoral had already dispatched her companion, presumably to circulate news of the unexpected pairing in her box. "What exactly do you propose, Your Grace?" "For tonight, we are cordial acquaintances with shared cultural interests," he replied, "neither friends nor enemies. Tomorrow, we begin discreet inquiries about who orchestrated Lady Montgomery's absence and my convenient arrival. And the purpose of this charade." Harrington's expression remained neutral, but his voice carried an edge of steel. "To buy time. To identify our opponents before they can complete whatever narrative they've constructed." Catherine weighed his words against her instincts. The Duke had never given her reason to doubt his honor, despite their business conflicts. If he was correct about this manipulation, acting independently could play directly into their adversary's hands. "Very well," she conceded, "but I have conditions. This arrangement remains strictly professional, no liberties, implied or otherwise, and I maintain final authority over my own affairs." Naturally, he offered his arm with formal correctness. "Shall we make an appearance in the grand foyer?" "I believe it would be expected." Catherine placed her gloved hand lightly on his sleeve, her posture perfect. Remember, Your Grace, I am not accustomed to following another's lead. On the contrary, Lady Blackwood, he replied as they moved toward the door. I'm counting on it. The grand foyer of the Royal Opera House glittered with chandeliers and jewels, a carefully orchestrated display of wealth and status. Catherine moved through the space with practiced ease, her hand resting lightly on Harrington's arm. She felt the subtle shift in the room as they entered. Conversations pausing momentarily, glances exchanged, fans fluttering to conceal whispers. Lady Blackwood, what a pleasant surprise. Lady Westmoreland approached, her assessment taking in their paired appearance with poorly disguised interest. And Your Grace, I wasn't aware you two were acquainted beyond business matters. The Duke and I share an appreciation for Rossini, Catherine replied smoothly, though we often disagree on interpretation. Indeed, Harrington added. Lady Blackwood finds the emotional resonance most compelling, while I admire the technical precision. Lady Westmoreland's smile tightened slightly at their easy report. How fascinating. I must tell you, there's been the most curious talk about the Northern Railway Investment Committee. Sir William mentioned your name specifically. Lady Blackwood, Catherine caught the flicker in Harrington's expression. Confirmation that this was no idle gossip. Sir William should focus on his own investments. His recent ventures in coal have been unfortunate. One hears many things during intermission, Harrington interjected smoothly. Most prove insubstantial in daylight. They continued their circuit of the foyer, maintaining a careful distance while presenting a united appearance. Catherine noted with interest how Harrington navigated social waters, his responses measured, revealing nothing while observing everything. It was the same precision she'd witnessed in boardrooms, though there it had been deployed against her interests, rather than alongside them. Lord Harcourt at your left, she murmured as they paused near a column. He seems determined to intercept us. Let him, Harrington replied, his voice equally low. Watch for who he speaks to afterward, as the bells signaled the end of intermission. Catherine realized they had executed a nearly flawless performance, neither too familiar nor too distant, giving nothing away, while gathering intelligence with every exchange. Ready for the second act? Harrington asked as they turned toward the stairs. The question carried weight beyond the immediate return to their box. Always. As the second act progressed, Catherine and Harrington refined their strategy through subtle cues and minimal conversation. They established boundaries without explicit discussion, how close to sit, when to lean toward each other, which topics were permissible. In this strange arrangement, the soprano's interpretation lacks the vulnerability the role requires, Catherine observed during a particularly passionate area. Perhaps, Harrington replied, though vulnerability often conceals its own kind of strength. Their eyes met briefly, and Catherine recognized the parallel he was drawing. Their charade required a certain exposure, a calculated risk that felt uncomfortably like vulnerability. During a dramatic pause in the music, he leaned slightly closer. Lord Pembroke has been watching us since we returned. He's known to correspond regularly with Sir William. Catherine nodded almost imperceptibly, and Lady Balmoral has changed seats to improve her view of our box. They're documenting our every interaction, Harrington confirmed. The question remains, to what end? Power, Catherine said simply. My shipping contracts threaten certain monopolies. Your political influence challenges established hierarchies. Together, we represent disruption to the old order. Yet separately, we're manageable opponents. The observation hung between them, an acknowledgement of their peculiar position. Adversaries forced into alliance by a greater threat. As the performance continued, Catherine found herself increasingly aware of Harrington's presence. The subtle shifts in his posture when certain parties entered the theater, the controlled cadence of his breathing, the way his hand occasionally tightened on the armrest when significant names were mentioned in their hushed exchanges. We should establish signals, she suggested during the next crescendo of music, for when we're observed, but cannot speak freely. A language of our own, he agreed. Program open. Proceed with caution. Fan extended. Conversation being monitored. Gloves adjusted. Disengage immediately. Catherine added. Watch touched. I have information to share. Opera glasses raised unnecessarily. Potential ally in sight. Efficient as always, Lady Blackwood. Necessity, Your Grace, not efficiency. As they settled into this new, unspoken understanding, Catherine realized they were constructing something beyond a mere defensive alliance. They were creating a private world within the public sphere, a shared territory with its own customs and language. The realization was both unsettling and oddly comforting. For all their past conflicts, she had never doubted Harrington's intelligence. Now she was beginning to appreciate his perception as well. During the second intermission, Harrington guided Catherine toward the Patron's Circle, an exclusive gathering space reserved for the Opera House's most generous benefactors. Their entrance caused a momentary lull in conversation before the practiced social masks fell back into place. Lady Blackwood, what an unexpected pleasure. Lord Harcourt approached immediately, his smile not reaching his eyes. I don't believe I've seen you in the Patron's Circle before. The Duke kindly extended an invitation, Catherine replied. I've been considering increasing my cultural contributions. How admirable. Lady Balmoral joined them, her gaze flicking between Catherine and Harrington. Though some might question whether commercial success translates to cultural discernment. The barb was delivered with such practiced sweetness that anyone overhearing might have mistaken it for a compliment. Catherine felt Harrington tense, slightly beside her. I've always found Lady Blackwood's judgment to be exceptionally refined, he countered smoothly, in business and aesthetics alike. Sir William Forsyth approached their growing circle, completing the trio Harrington had identified earlier. Your Grace, your support of the new Italian conductor was quite progressive. Not everyone appreciates such modern interpretations of classical works. Progress and tradition need not be enemies, Sir William, Harrington replied, though those who profit from keeping them at odds might suggest otherwise. Catherine observed the subtle exchanges with new clarity. The conversation appeared innocuous, yet beneath the pleasantries lay a complex network of alliances and oppositions. The Patron's Circle wasn't merely a social gathering. It was a governing body that controlled which artists received patronage, which performances were funded, and by extension, which members of society gained cultural capital. I understand you've recently acquired influence on the opera's board of directors. Catherine addressed Lady Balmoral directly. Your late husband was always passionate about traditional programming. Indeed, the Countess replied. Some traditions must be preserved, particularly when new voices threaten to overwhelm established wisdom. As they circulated through the room, Catherine and Harrington pieced together the structure of influence. Lord Harcourt controlled access to the private boxes through his position as head of the membership committee. Sir William managed the opera's finances. Lady Balmoral determined which artists received patronage. Together, they formed a formidable triumvirate that extended far beyond the theater into London's social and financial spheres. They're not just cultural gatekeepers, Catherine murmured as they prepared to return to their seats. They're kingmakers. Harrington nodded grimly. And we've both refused to be crowned on their terms. The encounter occurred in the smaller East Salon during the final intermission. Catherine had separated briefly from Harrington to maintain the appearance of independence. Aware they were being closely observed, she was examining a new painting acquisition when she overheard her name from a nearby conversation. Lady Blackwood's methods have always been questionable, Sir William was saying to a group of influential bankers. One wonders how a widow secured the Portuguese contracts when more established houses were bidding. Perhaps her relationship with Harrington explains certain advantages. The insinuation hung in the air: corruption, impropriety, perhaps even intimacy used as currency. Catherine felt her chest tighten with anger. But before she could approach, Harrington's voice cut through the murmurs. I find speculation on business matters at cultural events rather tedious, Sir William. His tone was conversational, yet carried unmistakable authority, particularly when based on demonstrably false premises. Sir William turned, feigning surprise at Harrington's presence. Your Grace, I meant no offense, merely observing that unusual alliances often yield unexpected outcomes. The only unusual element is your apparent confusion regarding public record, Harrington replied, his expression pleasant but his eyes cold. Lady Blackwood secured those contracts 3 months before I had any involvement in Portuguese affairs, and her terms were superior by every measure. The documentation is available at the Commerce Office for anyone genuinely interested in facts rather than fiction. The precision of his response, factual, unemotional, and without a hint of personal defense or attachment, silenced the group more effectively than any passionate objection could have. He had neither claimed friendship with Catherine nor distanced himself from her. He had simply stated verifiable truth. Catherine remained where she was, outwardly absorbed in the painting, while processing what had just occurred. Harrington had defended her reputation without claiming any relationship to it, a distinction that revealed more about his character than any declaration could have. When they rejoined in their box for the final act, neither mentioned the incident, but something had shifted between them. A new understanding that transcended their carefully constructed alliance. For the first time, Catherine allowed herself to wonder if she had misjudged the Duke in more ways than one. When the final curtain fell, and the theater erupted in applause, Catherine rose with deliberate grace. Throughout the last act, she had maintained perfect composure, while inwardly reassessing everything she thought she knew about the Duke of Harrington. His defense in the East Salon had been impeccable, factual, dispassionate, and impossible to misinterpret. Yet it was precisely this perfection that now troubled her. He had protected her reputation with the same strategic precision he applied to business negotiations and political maneuvers. Was this simply another calculated move in their temporary alliance? Shall we brave the reception? Harrington asked as the audience began to disperse. I think not, Catherine replied, gathering her belongings. We've given them enough to speculate about for one evening. If he was surprised by her sudden withdrawal, he concealed it well. As you wish. May I escort you to your carriage? Thank you. But that won't be necessary. She met his gaze directly. Your performance tonight was admirable, Your Grace, particularly in the East Salon. A flicker of something, confusion, concern, crossed his features. I merely corrected a factual error. Precisely. Catherine adjusted her shawl. Good night, Your Grace. I'm sure our paths will cross again when circumstances demand it. She departed with measured steps, aware of the eyes following her progress. The Duke remained in the box, respecting her unspoken request for distance. Only when she reached the grand staircase did she permit herself a moment of uncertainty. Harrington's intervention had been exactly what their alliance required, effective without implying impropriety. So why did its very perfection leave her feeling hollow in her carriage? Catherine stared at the passing street lamps, their glow punctuating the darkness like uncertain thoughts. She had spent years building walls around her independence, learning to navigate a world that viewed a woman of ambition with suspicion. Harrington's defense, however proper, felt dangerously close to rescue, and rescue, in her experience, always came with expectations. Better to retreat now, before gratitude could be mistaken for something more complicated, before an alliance of necessity transformed into a vulnerability she couldn't afford, before she forgot that in matters of both business and heart, she stood alone by choice. The following evening found Catherine in her study reviewing correspondence, when her butler announced an unexpected visitor. Mr. James Thornton, my lady. Catherine set aside her papers with surprise. The stage manager from the opera house. Show him in. Thornton entered with the careful demeanor of a man accustomed to navigating between worlds. Not quite servant, not quite gentleman. His graying hair and lined face spoke of decades observing from the shadows. Forgive the intrusion, Lady Blackwood, he began, declining her offer to sit. The Duke of Harrington suggested I might provide information of interest regarding last night's arrangements. Did he indeed? Catherine maintained a neutral expression. And what information would that be? I've managed the Royal Opera House boxes for 27 years, Thornton said, his voice low and measured. I know every patron, every preference, every special request. Lady Montgomery's message canceling her attendance came not from her household, but was delivered by a boy I didn't recognize, paid to bring it directly to me. Catherine's attention sharpened, and the Duke's appearance. Lord Harcourt himself instructed me to inform His Grace that the seat beside you was available, should he inquire. Thornton's gaze was steady, which is peculiar, as His Grace had not attended a performance in over 2 months, nor was he expected last night. So Lord Harcourt anticipated the Duke would somehow know to ask about my box specifically, Catherine concluded. How convenient. There's more, Thornton continued. After you departed last night, I overheard Lady Balmoral speaking with Sir William. She mentioned that the first act went precisely as planned, and that the narrative practically writes itself now. Catherine rose, pacing slowly before the fireplace. Why are you telling me this, Mr. Thornton? Surely such disclosure risks your position. The stage manager straightened his shoulders. My loyalty is to the Opera House, my lady, not to those who would use it as a theater for their own machinations. The Duke assured me you could be trusted to handle this information with discretion. He was correct, Catherine acknowledged, though I'm curious why he didn't deliver this information himself. His Grace mentioned only that he believed you preferred direct evidence to second-hand assurances. Thornton bowed slightly. He also asked me to inform you that he will be attending the Empty Stage rehearsal tomorrow morning at dawn. Should you wish to discuss these matters further. Dawn painted the eastern sky in muted gold as Catherine's carriage arrived at the Opera House's stage entrance. The building stood silent, a different creature, entirely from the glittering social arena of the previous nights. Her decision to come had been made in the quiet hours before sunrise. After a night of restless consideration, the stage door opened to her knock, revealing not Thornton, but Harrington himself. He appeared different in the early light, less the formal Duke, and more the man beneath the title. His attire, though still impeccable, was simpler. His expression, seeing her, held something unguarded. You came, he said simply. Evidence demanded consideration, she replied, following him through the shadowed corridors. They emerged onto the empty stage, a vast space transformed by absence. Without audience or performers, the theater revealed its bones, ropes and pulleys, painted canvas, the machinery of illusion laid bare. Morning light filtered through high windows, catching dust motes that danced in golden suspension. Catherine moved to center stage, turning slowly to face the vacant house. It looks different from here. Everything does, when viewed from a new perspective. Harrington remained at the edge, allowing her the space. Why did you send Thornton instead of coming yourself? She asked directly. Because you value independence above all things, he answered with equal directness. And because after the East Salon, I sensed you needed distance from any appearance of intervention. Catherine studied him in the honest morning light. You defended my reputation without claiming connection to it. Your reputation needs no defense. It required only truth. Truth is rarely so simple in our circles. Harrington stepped forward, joining her in the pool of light. Perhaps that's why we've both made enemies. We insist on clarity, where others prefer convenient shadows, standing together on the empty stage, stripped of audience and pretense. Catherine recognized the fundamental shift that had occurred. Their alliance, begun as strategic necessity, had evolved into something more elemental, a recognition of shared values beneath their surface conflicts. What happens when the curtain rises again? She asked quietly. Harrington replied, depends entirely on whether we choose to perform the role others have written for us or author our own. They had moved to the orchestra pit, sitting side by side on the musician's bench as Harrington explained what he had discovered. Lord Harcourt controls more than box assignments, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. He chairs the committee that will determine the next governor of the Bank of England. Sir William and Lady Balmoral are merely his instruments. And this concerns us how? Catherine asked, though she had begun to see the pattern. The final candidate list will be presented next week. I've been considered a front-runner, given my banking reforms in the House of Lords. Harrington's profile was sharp against the shadowed background. Your shipping company, meanwhile, has applied for exclusive contracts with the bank for overseas transactions. Understanding dawned. If you were appointed governor while appearing to have a personal connection to me, both our reputations would be compromised. My appointment would be challenged as favoritism, your contracts dismissed as improper influence. He turned to face her directly. A convenient elimination of two problems with one carefully orchestrated scandal. And what do you propose? I've already done it. His voice was calm, matter of fact. This morning I withdrew my name from consideration for the governorship. Catherine stared at him, genuinely shocked. You cannot be serious. You've worked toward that position for years. Some prices are too high. Harrington's gaze was steady. I will not advance my position at the expense of your reputation. I never asked for such sacrifice, she said sharply. Which is precisely why it was mine to make. He stood, pacing the narrow space. The governorship can wait. There will be other opportunities that don't require compromise. Catherine watched him, reassessing everything she thought she knew about Alexander Harrington. His ambition was well known, his determination legendary. Yet he had relinquished a crowning achievement without hesitation. Why? The question escaped before she could contain it. Harrington paused, considering her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Because principles that bend under pressure were never principles at all, and because you deserve the success you've earned, without shadow or question. The simplicity of his answer, devoid of calculation or expectation, left Catherine momentarily speechless, a rare occurrence she found both unsettling and strangely liberating. They left the theater as the city began to stir, morning light transforming London's grey stone to warm gold. By unspoken agreement, they walked rather than taking their carriages, following the path along the Thames. What will you do now? Catherine asked as they passed beneath the shadow of St. Paul's. Continue my work in the Lords, Harrington replied. There are other reforms that require attention. And you? Will you pursue the bank contracts? Though perhaps with modified terms to ensure transparency. She glanced at him. Your withdrawal changes nothing about their merit. They walked in companionable silence, their steps falling into natural rhythm. Catherine found herself noticing details she had overlooked before. How Harrington acknowledged passing workers with the same respect he showed to peers, the thoughtful consideration he gave before speaking, the way he instinctively positioned himself between her and the street traffic near Blackfriars Bridge. They paused to watch the morning light play across the water. The city's usual clamor seemed distant, creating an unexpected pocket of tranquility. I've spent years defining myself by what I resist, Catherine said suddenly. The constraints of widowhood, the limitations placed on women in commerce, even you as a business rival. Harrington turned toward her, waiting. I wonder now if that resistance has become its own kind of constraint, she continued. If in fighting so fiercely for independence, I've denied myself certain possibilities, such as trust perhaps, the recognition that not all connections demand submission. The morning breeze carried the scent of the river and distant bakeries. Around them, London continued its awakening, indifferent to personal revelations occurring in its midst. I've admired your determination from the beginning, Harrington said quietly, even when it opposed my interests. Perhaps especially then. Catherine studied him in the clear morning light, seeing beyond the Duke to the man himself, complex, principled, and far more aligned with her own values than she had permitted herself to recognize. We've been cast as adversaries for so long, she observed. I wonder what we might accomplish as allies instead. I believe, he replied with a hint of a smile, that's entirely for us to decide. They broke their fast at a small establishment near the Inns of Court, away from their usual social circles. The simple act of sharing a meal without performance or agenda felt revolutionary in its ordinariness. We should address Lord Harcourt's machinations directly, Catherine said, stirring her tea. Defensive maneuvers have their place, but I prefer decisive action. I agree, though confrontation carries risks, Harrington replied. What do you propose? Transparency. We acknowledge our business interests openly, including areas where they conflict. We establish clear boundaries between personal association and professional matters. Her eyes met his directly. And we refuse to hide whatever relationship develops between us, while equally refusing to define it according to others' expectations. A bold strategy, Harrington observed. Society prefers neat categories, rivals or allies, friends or lovers. You're suggesting something more complex. I'm suggesting something more honest, Catherine corrected. We are business competitors in some arenas and potential collaborators in others. We share certain principles while maintaining independent priorities, and she hesitated briefly. find value in each other's company that transcends strategic advantage. Harrington considered her words, his expression thoughtful. Such clarity would disarm Harcourt's insinuations while preserving our respective positions. It has elegance. More importantly, it has integrity, Catherine added. Something our opponents consistently underestimate. As they finished their meal and prepared to return to their separate responsibilities, Harrington hesitated. There is one matter we haven't addressed. The Opera House subscription season continues for another 3 months. Will you attend the next performance? The question carried weight beyond its simple phrasing. Catherine understood he was asking not just about opera, but about their willingness to be seen together publicly, deliberately, by choice rather than circumstance. I believe I shall, she replied. Though I find I now prefer the view from the stage at dawn to the evening's spectacle. As do I. His smile reached his eyes. Perhaps we might experience both. As they parted ways at the street corner, Catherine felt a sense of possibility she hadn't permitted herself in years. Not the breathless anticipation of romance, but the steadier, deeper satisfaction of choosing a path, defined by neither rebellion nor conformity, but by authentic connection. 6 months later, Catherine entered the Royal Opera House on Harrington's arm, her midnight blue gown complementing his formal attire. Their arrival created the expected stir, heads turning, conversations pausing, speculation rippling through the gathered elite. But unlike their first appearance together, this entrance was deliberate, the whispers anticipated rather than feared. Lady Balmoral looks positively apoplectic, Catherine murmured as they ascended the grand staircase. I believe she's still recovering from your donation establishing the scholarship for female composers. A worthy investment, Harrington replied, his hand covering hers briefly on his arm. Though not nearly as effective as your acquisition of controlling interest in the shipping company that manages the opera's Italian imports. Business is business, Catherine said with a smile that contained genuine warmth. Cultural patronage is merely its more civilized expression. The past months had transformed their cautious alliance into something neither had anticipated. Their business interests remained distinct, sometimes aligned, occasionally opposed, but conducted with transparent communication that defied the backroom manipulations of London's old guard. More surprising was the personal understanding that had developed between them, built on shared principles rather than convenient passion. They had established their own traditions. Weekly walks along the Thames, discussing politics and commerce. Occasional dinners, where business was explicitly forbidden as a topic. Regular attendance at concerts and lectures, where they often arrived separately, but departed together, confounding those who sought to categorize their relationship. Tonight marked a particular milestone. The premiere of a new opera they had jointly commissioned, featuring a libretto that subtly satirized the social machinations they had experienced firsthand. As they took their seats in Catherine's box, now expanded through the acquisition of adjacent spaces, Lord Harcourt approached with careful deference. Lady Blackwood, Your Grace. A pleasure to see you both supporting the arts so consistently. The arts thrive on consistent patronage, Catherine replied pleasantly, though we find they flourish best when freed from excessive control. Indeed, Harrington added. Tonight's performance explores that very theme, the tension between tradition and independence. I believe you'll find it thought-provoking, Harcourt. The older man's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I look forward to it. Though I must say, your partnership continues to surprise society. Few expected such. Accommodation between known rivals. Perhaps, Catherine suggested, her tone light but her gaze direct. That says more about society's imagination than about us. As Harcourt withdrew and the house lights dimmed, Harrington leaned slightly toward her. That was diplomatically savage. I learned from the best, she replied, her eyes meeting his with shared understanding. The curtain rose on their commissioned work, and as the first notes filled the theater, Catherine reflected that some performances were meant for public consumption, while others, far more meaningful, unfolded in private, beyond the reach of society's judgment. After the performance concluded to enthusiastic applause, Catherine and Harrington hosted a small reception in the private salon they had secured for the evening. The carefully curated guest list included rising artists, progressive politicians, and forward-thinking business leaders, a deliberate statement about their vision for London's future cultural landscape. "Your opera was remarkably pointed, Lady Blackwood," Sir William observed with forced joviality. The character of the manipulative patron seemed almost familiar. "Art often reflects life's universal patterns," Catherine replied smoothly, "though any resemblance to particular individuals is, of course, coincidental." Across the room, Harrington was deep in conversation with the young composer they had sponsored, a woman whose talent had been overlooked until their intervention provided both funding and platform. Catherine observed their interaction with quiet satisfaction. His attention focused completely on the artist's ideas, offering neither condescension nor undue praise, but genuine engagement. Later, as the reception wound down and guests began to depart, Harrington joined Catherine near the windows overlooking the lamplit street below. "A successful evening," he noted. "Though I suspect we've made our point rather definitively. Sometimes clarity is kindest," Catherine replied, "even when it appears otherwise." They stood in companionable silence, watching London's nightlife unfold beneath them. After a moment, Harrington spoke again, his voice carrying a new note of consideration. "I've received an offer to serve as special envoy to Portugal. The trade negotiations would benefit from someone familiar with both diplomatic protocol and commercial interests." Catherine turned toward him, understanding the implications immediately. "How long would you be away?" 6 months, possibly longer." His eyes held hers steadily. "I wanted to discuss it with you before deciding." The statement was simple yet profound, an acknowledgement that their lives, while independent, had become meaningfully intertwined, not through formal commitment or passionate declaration, but through the quieter, deeper choice to consider each other in decisions that shaped their separate paths. "You should accept," Catherine said after a moment's reflection. "Your experience would be invaluable, and as it happens, I've been considering expanding my company's Mediterranean operations." Harrington's expression warmed with understanding, which might require occasional visits to Lisbon. "Purely for business purposes, of course." "Of course." The last guests had departed, leaving them alone in the salon. Beyond the windows, London continued its eternal rhythms, carriages moving through lamplight, distant music from other establishments, the subtle pulse of a city constantly reinventing itself while honoring its past. "We've created something rather remarkable, haven't we?" Catherine observed quietly. "Yes," Harrington agreed, his hand finding hers in the shadow between them, "though I believe we've only just begun." Their fingers interlaced, a private gesture in a public space, symbolic of the balance they had found between independence and connection, between maintaining separate identities and building a shared future, defined not by society's expectations, but by their own deliberate choice.